The year is 1986, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And I thought the whole world talked in a Brooklyn accent. Everyone seemed to be so proud to be from the old neighborhood. But at the same time, everyone wanted to get the fuck out if they could. The Godfather had given voice and witness to our culture's struggle, its dark side, and its resourceful genius. Goodfellas, on the other hand, the other most defining of Italian-American mafia films, hadn't yet been made in 1986. And I'm sort of the Henry Hill of our little part of the neighborhood, being half Sicilian and half Irish myself. And my father was an alcoholic New York cop, to boot. See, our dads were either blue-collar guys or gangsters. And the only other world that existed was the one in movies where rich preppy kids named Brad hung out at ski lodges with blondes in hot tubs. My family took one vacation my whole life to the Catskills. My parents would laugh at me when I asked them if we could go skiing. And the fact that my dad was on the other side of the law didn't bode very well for living on the set of The Sopranos. I think I was the only kid in the whole neighborhood whose name didn't end in a vowel, and definitely who had an Irish father who was a cop. The neighborhood was at the same time god-awful and somehow romantic. The Italians had been immigrating here for 8 decades, but after a generation or two in America, all the sons wanted to be little fucking Caesars. Even the people who had nothing to do with the mafia, they were all ready to make war over a glance at their woman, the slightest insult, or God forbid you said something about their sister or their mother. I mean, people literally got killed for that. Can you imagine? Somebody says your sister is fat or ugly, and you brutally beat or kill them and spend your life in prison over some ridiculous code of the streets where if you are ever disrespected, you have to settle that score as quickly and violently as you possibly can. So when I was 15 in high school, I guess one day I saw a girl and I said, "Wow, man, she's hot," to a few other guys who were standing around. Apparently, one of them felt obligated to inform her boyfriend. 2 days later, fucking Frankie Denisi, who, mind you, was the youngest of 5 criminally violent brothers, all of whom are now either murdered or died of drug overdoses, and who himself was a black belt in some martial art, comes up to me and clocks me in the side of my head. I don't know nothing. I'm just standing around smoking a cigarette, and he comes up to me out of the blue and punches me in the side of my head hard, knocks me down, and starts saying some shit about, "Don't you ever talk about my girlfriend." By this point, the school guards rush in, and because he didn't even go to that high school, he takes off. Then, 15 minutes later, under enormous social pressure, I'm driving around with my crew in a car looking for this kid because I'm supposed to now confront him and kick his ass, or at least have a straight-up fight with him. And the last thing I really want to do is fight this crazy fuck. And so then the worst thing happens. I actually find the guy. I get out of the car, go up to him, challenge him to a fight, and about 7 minutes of pummeling later, blood is gushing out of my nose, my face, my eyes. I've got a loose front tooth from a knee to my mouth, and thank God some girls who knew me from grammar school threw themselves in Joey's way and pulled him off of me. Otherwise, he'd probably have done worse. And this wasn't the first time I had to do something like that. When I was about 12 or 13, I had to fight some kickboxing champion named Tony Mousy. It was bad. Bruises, bumps, black and blues everywhere. But at 12, it wasn't deadly. In fact, it was just humiliating. Because then my mother actually walks me down the block to the kid's house and says, "Look at what your son did to my son, the animal." And you know what the kid's father says? He says, "I sent him to kickboxing so he could defend himself against bullies. Maybe your son should learn how to fight if he doesn't want to get his ass handed to him another time." Can you say PTSD? On top of this, my childhood friend's father was gunned down in front of his house when we were 10 years old. Can you imagine that? Your father assassinated in a mob hit on your block in front of your own house. And his mother's father was a famous gangster as well, who architected major airport heists. When we were a kid, he had the ankle bracelet under house arrest. He finally got caught when he was like 70. So my friend, his destiny was being a gangster. This friend of mine, let's just call him Vito, to protect the guilty. He became a psychopath himself. And let me tell you, this kid was a genius too. Crazy and a genius. The perfect future gangster combination. So my dad, shifting gears here, back to my dad. He was never fucking around. He was either working nights or drunk with his cop friends. I never saw him, and when I did, he was pretty fucking scary. He was a badass. Vietnam veteran, hardened and tough, and everybody knew it. My six Irish uncles knew it, his friends knew it, and I knew it. Even the neighborhood guys knew it and would not fuck with my dad. I once saw him grab a motorcycle with a guy riding on it and fling the bike about 15 feet for coming close to my little sister. But that didn't really help me. It only added to the differences the kids noticed about me. I was kind of sensitive, thoughtful, nerd smart with a creative streak. Plus, I was the whitest kid around with blonde hair and blue eyes in a land of dark-skinned Southern Italians. And my dad's the only cop for miles. Funny thing is, my mother, who's 100% Sicilian, wanted to name me Giuseppe after my grandfather. But when she sounded it out, Giuseppe McDuff, she went with a full-on Irish brand instead. Sean Patrick McDuff. Yeah, it sort of rolls off the tongue with a brogue naturally if you let it. So that really boded well for me growing up. There's Vito, Frankie, Cheech, Joey, Anthony, which by the way means Anthony, Sal, Tony, Giovanni, Louie, and Sean. Which one of these kids doesn't belong? It's sort of like Staten Island. Oops. Which one of these boroughs doesn't belong? It's a kid's game. But being different as I was, I got bullied and fucked with and took many beatings. I had hundreds of fights. I lived next to a schoolyard. I won some, I lost some. The worst were the ones I would win, because I learned that when I was winning, if I didn't really hurt the other kid, he'd keep coming at me until I did, or until I lost. It just fucking killed me on the inside to experience their pain and fear, to really look into their eyes and see that, and then have to hurt them more. And it never stopped either. From 5 to 15, I was constantly on alert and always looking over my shoulder and worried about where I'd walk and how to get safely to school and back. And their fear of my dad didn't stop the neighborhood tough guys from fucking with me. Plus, my father wouldn't have gotten involved anyway. He'd have expected me to settle my own scores on my own, which I had to do my whole life. It wasn't until I got recruited into a crew that I was protected from the bullying. So these stereotypes lived deeply in me. I'm hardcore Sicilian, with a giant tribe of cousins and grandparents from the other side, and an Angela's ashes-like, broken, alcoholic, poor Irish family full of New York cops, firemen, Civil War veterans, longshoremen, and pub keepers. I've got generations of blood and sweat in the soil of Brooklyn, and it buried in me. Brooklyn is me, and I am Brooklyn. So my friend Vito, at 15, his favorite character in The Godfather was Sonny. You know, the eldest son of Don Corleone, who was a wild, murdering gangster who defiantly goes down in a blaze of machine gun fire. Well, Vito would watch this scene over and over again. He was obsessed with the character, and he played this guy's part perfectly. We'd be at a red light. We're 15 years old. And he'd get into a staring contest with the punks in the car next to us. Vito would jump out of the car with a butcher knife and start stabbing their tires, ready to maul anyone who dared exit the vehicle. He just did this for fun. The kids in the car would turn pale. There was no way they were getting out. So lucky for me, at 14, my Irish-Italian genes kicked in, and I went from a nerdy-looking pudgy kid to a thin California-looking teenager, which was an anomaly where I lived. And I started pulling in the chicks. I was wicked fucking smart, and I could lie and scheme impressively, do massive amounts of drugs and alcohol, and remain standing. I think I owe that to the Irish side. And I became a DJ and a musician. So Vito liked all that, and he liked having someone around smart. He also commanded the authority, and when the word went out, I was no longer to be fucked with. I remember kids who previously hated me and wanted to kill me all the time suddenly were courteous and friendly. That's how much influence Vito had. And in 1986, any other world seemed so infinitely far away. I felt completely trapped and doomed. But it was all I knew. You see, this was the air we breathed, the way we were nurtured. Manipulate, lie, steal, take what you want, but stay loyal to your friends and family. That was all that mattered, I was told. So a lot of us went to this experimental high school on the border of Coney Island called John Dewey. It was huge. At least 10 to 15 acres of land surrounded the school, which was unique for a city school. And there were trees and fields to hang out in and lots of back lots to cause mischief. And the school was located right next to the subway depot where they kept all the trains out of service. So we would cut holes in the fence and go graffiti up the trains. There were several thousand students from all walks of life. There were Italian kids who were kind of like the jocks and athletes since we didn't have any preppies. And they pretty much ran the school. There were the kids from Trump Village, this godforsaken complex of apartment buildings in between Brighton Beach and Coney Island, made up mostly of Jewish families. They pretty much fit in with the Italian crowd. I don't know why, but Jews and Italians can get along. At least on the surface, and I'll leave that for somebody else to explain. There were rocker kids who wore mostly black with denim jackets. You guys remember those denim jackets with the band names painted on the back, right? They listened to like new wave music or heavy metal. They smoked weed, they played music, they had fun. They had no real enemies. I realize now I was so much more like them, but I had no idea how to cross over at the time. There were Russian kids who came mostly from Brighton Beach, and back then they were pretty sparse and therefore insignificant. Not like today. Today the Russians totally dominate Sheepshead Bay, let alone Brighton Beach. There were the nerds, the computer science kids, another group I realize in retrospect I was more like than I could appreciate at the time. I ended up helping to build the internet, so in retrospect I kind of look back and go, wow, what was I doing hanging out with the gangsters? But they were totally insignificant to the social order, and so they didn't matter at all, really. There were the Chinese kids, and it was like they pretended we didn't exist, and we pretended they didn't exist. And you didn't want to fuck with these kids either. There were like millions of them, right? And you know, they had their own gang system, so there wasn't any reason we could see to interact, and there was relative peace between us and them. Then there were the Puerto Rican kids. Their girls were hot, and the guys were hot-headed, like us. They rocked pimped-out cars and loud music from their stereos. They were culturally strong, and they had their own identity that riffed against ours. So there was fights and stabbings and shootings and stuff like that. There was tension that would blow up at times, but for the most part, it was okay, besides an occasional murder every 5 years or so. And then there were the black kids, and they were the most feared and hated because they were just plain dangerous. They would love to catch one of us alone, and they'd descend on us like a pack of dogs and sting hard. It happened to me. They'd take everything, your money, your jewelry, anything in your pockets, even your sneakers if they could. And if you were vulnerable, you could expect to get hit. So we'd never walk past the projects. We'd always drive or take the train to school from Bensonhurst because you had to pass the projects to get to school. And we would never go into the projects, even with a crew and even with weapons, because there was a completely different set of rules there and a kind of depression and disregard for life that we would not fuck with. We just stayed out of that world. However, we loved freestyle and hip hop. We would rock Run DMC and Public Enemy and LL Cool J. Anybody know these artists? Biz Markie, the Fat Boys, Africa Bambaataa. Of course, the Beastie Boys, right? Of course, the Beastie Boys were our heroes because they'd always shout out Brooklyn. And Italian kids had their own style of breakdance, and we would do all those floor moves, but we had these more up-rockin' steps that were like John Travolta inspired from the disco era. You know, you feel me? So that was one place we actually did all bond, on the cardboard, out on the streets. There was no color in those transcendent moments. When the beat had you moving, you were there. Sometimes even the Chinese kids breakdanced. There was still plenty of tension, but we'd battle in dance, and there wasn't any stabbings or fights or robberies going on, just the love of music and dance. It was beautiful. So here's the big thing. One day at high school, one of my buddies, a kid from South Brooklyn named Kevin Maloney, he's turning 16. Now, Kevin was like me. He's half Irish, half Sicilian, and he's from South Brooklyn. Today, they call that Park Slope, which at the time was not a baby carriage gridlock wonderland. It was actually a tough fucking neighborhood surrounded by some of the most dangerous parts of Brooklyn where there were real Irish gangsters and you were in survival mode all the time. My crew liked Kevin. He was a super tough fucking kid, and they adopted him also. Vito, he's the head of our crew, and then there was this other guy, Giovanni. He was like a lieutenant. Giovanni was also a scheming mastermind who was fearless and loved to antagonize and provoke danger, especially Vito. He would make Vito do crazy shit. Giovanni's family was Sicilian. His parents barely even spoke English. And get this, even though he's only 16 and he doesn't have a driver's license, his father would give Giovanni this brand new Lincoln Town car, and underneath the front seat was a .45 Magnum, right? So imagine you give your 16-year-old son without a driver's license the keys to a brand new luxury car with a gun under the front seat to drive to high school. It's fucking insane, right? So on Kevin's birthday, we all dress up in suits with gold chains. I mean, you know what Guidos are, right? In Brooklyn, we used to call ourselves Cousins. It was a little different, but we have suits on and like Adidas sneakers and gold chains. We look silly, right? But we think we're very, very cool. Very cool. And we were. In that neighborhood, we were cool. We'd get laughed out of the clubs in Manhattan, but we owned where we lived. So we cut out of school at like 11 in the morning. We climb into Giovanni's Lincoln Town car, and we go into the Coney Island amusement park to celebrate Kevin's birthday. We smoke some weed, we pick up some 40 ounces, we get to Coney Island, start playing games, you know, like skeet ball or shooting a water gun until the balloon explodes and you get some cheap shit, some teddy bears or whatever. So we're there throwing around a few dollars in Coney Island, and we obviously catch the attention of some local Puerto Rican and black kids who in Coney Island had common ground to form their own gangs. And when we're done and leaving the arcade, walking back to Giovanni's car, this gang of about 10 kids follows us. They catch up to us. They pull out knives and razors, and they say, "Give us your money, your chains, and your sneakers." So I'm ready to do just that. Vito and Giovanni look at each other like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna have some fun now." There wasn't a word. It was just, you could see the glint in their eye. So Giovanni, he's like 5'0". He'd be really small for Martha. He pretends he's nervous, right? He's like, "I left my wallet in the car," and he's like jiggling his keys, and he stutters a bit, and they go for it. And as he pretends to nervously shake, looking for the right key, he slowly opens up the door, reaches under the seat, and pulls out the biggest fucking pistol you could imagine. And he actually pulls it out of the car like he's accidentally and surprisingly found something he can't quite handle. And believe me, we used to shoot this gun. And he spins around wielding this loaded fucking gun, and he says, "Whoa, what do we got here? Oh shit, it's my little friend. Fuck, I forgot about this." So this moment is literally like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, which hasn't been made yet. That sort of prankster, jokester could murder you at any second character he portrayed. But Giovanni is doing just that for real. And he's 16 years old in broad daylight on Mermaid Avenue in Coney Island. And as he points the gun around to all these Puerto Rican and black kids whose eyes glaze over in fear and they jolt back in horror, Giovanni says, "Now, you see, you guys is ruining my friend Kevin's birthday here. And I don't know, it doesn't make me very happy. But I tell you, I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourselves. Here's what's going to happen. You're all going to sing happy birthday to my friend Kevin. And if that goes over well enough with my friend Kevin and he likes it, I won't kill anybody today." And he meant it. And Giovanni proceeds to lead them in the most awful rendition of Happy Birthday, Kevin, in Spanglish Ebonics, to which he makes them pronounce the words correctly, speak up loudly, alta voce, and keep repeating it until Kevin feels satisfied we've humiliated them enough. I am fucking scared shitless. Like, what's gonna happen next? I'm about to be involved in a killing, the cops are gonna come, I got drugs on me, there's a gun, my life is gonna be ruined. I actually still had a hope of making something of myself someday. So I'm really shitting my pants, and everyone else is relaxed with these shit-eating grins of satisfaction at this very precious moment. So then, when they're done, Giovanni orders them to cough up their jewelry, what little money they had, their knives, and their sneakers, and sends them home in tube socks, robbed and humiliated. When we get back to school, we smoked up, and the guys just joked and laughed and relived the story. I was in shock. I was still in shock at what happened. I think I just went home and stuffed the pain. Don't ask me how, but a few years later, I managed to get into college. In fact, I went to a military academy. My dad pushed me into it, and he actually saved me by doing that. But during those years, I also made my way deep into the Celtic warrior Irish side of my culture in the bar scene of Flatbush and Hell's Kitchen, where I accrued another set of not-to-be-fucked-with friends. And I was actually able to introduce my Italian and Irish brethren who would have otherwise never met. They actually really appreciated each other. One of them was here tonight, but he left. Joe, are you still here? No, he left. He was 6'7". 6'7". Damn, scary guy. And after years of endless and outrageous and often dangerous shenanigans, another robbery in Harlem where we were almost all killed, and an incident with the police when I was 21. I was home on Christmas break from the military academy. That it finally came clear to us. My life and theirs were going in different directions. I looked over at Vito in a jail cell after the homicide detectives were done questioning us, and he says, "These fucking pigs are showing me pictures of my friends." And at that moment, I knew our childhood was over. They were becoming and did become professional criminals. And on one final day in 1994 at a courtroom in Brooklyn, where by a pure grace, the district attorney realized I wasn't like the other guys and didn't want to send me to prison, and therefore couldn't send the other guys to prison, otherwise I would have looked like I ratted. They let us all go on a misdemeanor. That day, Vito comes up to me. You should have seen the scene. It was like literally out of Sopranos. His family is there with sweatsuits, big hair. You know, they're like pissed. They're angry. But Vito comes up to me and says, "Shawnee, you know we love you, but we're letting you go. We can no longer be friends. We wish you the best." And I never, ever spoke another word to him or to any of those guys ever again. The Italian guys, ever. The Irish guys didn't become criminals, so I'm friends with some of them. They became firemen. I just paused there for a second because many of them did die at 9/11. I didn't become a military officer, but I did graduate as an engineer. I declined my commission. I became a punk rock musician and a hip-hop artist and an underground club promoter living in East Williamsburg in 1994. I pursued mysticism and personal transformation, and I was fortunate enough to be involved with the early internet. I ended up moving to California for a few years, and then I was working on documentary films and then started a strategy consulting business, and I ended up meeting Nobel Prize laureates and Deepak Chopra and presidents of countries. And then I ended up a brief stint teaching at Wharton, and I don't even have an MBA. The streets taught me something, and so did Vito. They taught me how to survive. And once I discovered there was a whole other world, it inspired me to strive for something so much more. In the end, I escaped. I did more than survive. Maybe I even learned how to thrive. Thank you, Vito. Thank you.